Feed my dogs. I'll be right back.
Okay. And I'm going to share the screen. That's not what I want to do. Here we go. Share. We've done all this. Well, let's see. We'll do a quick review. How about that?
Okay.
I've got that up there. I think we've got the recording going, got the screen share going. All right, we talked about wisdom literature last week, a section in the Bible. What are the books that are considered to be in that section of the Bible called wisdom literature?
All right. We said Psalms.
Psalms obviously is one of them.
Okay, so Proverbs.
Proverbs.
Ecclesiastes.
Ecclesiastes. Psalms, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes. The one that I don't ever want to teach again. Which one is that? Song of Solomon.
Oh, Psalms. That's right. Song of Solomon.
Where'd it go? Come on now. Let's see. There it is. Job, Psalms, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, and Song of Solomon. So you left out Job and Song of Solomon, but those two are in there. All right. We talked about Proverbs, their pithy sayings, Job, the origin of evil, pain, and suffering, Ecclesiastes, Song of Solomon, Psalms. What is this one? The sources of wisdom back in Bible times were priests, prophets, and wise men. On these PowerPoints that I've got for you, these things will be on the test. What's in my notes may or may not be, but you can pretty well count on the PowerPoints being on the midterm exam. The fear of Jehovah. I just got back from North Georgia, so I'm not got my head in the game yet. The fear of the Lord, which the word Lord, as we read it in the book of Psalms in the King James or New King James, if you will look at, in fact, most of the time in the Old Testament, whether it's wisdom literature or not, whenever you find the word Lord in the King James and the New King James and probably some other translations, you find it all in caps.
Okay.
L-O-R-D is all in capital letters. The Jews did not want to pronounce the name of the Lord and the name of God. And so to assist in that in the reading of scriptures, the King James, New King James, they took out the name Jehovah or Yahweh, which is the name that they consider the name of God, because they didn't want to take God's name in vain. They did not want to pronounce it, so they would not speak his name Yahweh. So they put in the word Lord, L-O-R-D, in his place. So every time you read the word Lord, it's actually the name or the word Yahweh, which we pronounce as Jehovah. That's not going to be on the test, but it's just an interesting piece of news. Whenever you think, when I read that word or that phrase there, the fear of the Lord, my head thinks the fear of Yahweh or the fear of Jehovah. And that's why I said I misspoke. Anyway, the fear of Jehovah, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. This is where wisdom begins. The respect for, the reverence for, the appreciation of who is God. We found that sources of Hebrew wisdom were family, community, teachers, priests and Levites, scholars and tribes. We did this already. Forms of Hebrew wisdom. Okay. Proverbs, numerical sayings, which would be lists. We talked about the riddle last week. Remember that? One of the Psalms we looked at was a riddle. Fable and allegory. Dialogue. This is more like the book of Job, or at least some portions of the book of Job. Characteristic. Oh, this is where we are. Okay, this is where we are tonight, starting with Hebrew parallelism. We left off with Hebrew parallelism. By measurement, 2/5 of the Old Testament is poetry. You'll find poetry, of course, in these wisdom books, wisdom literature, but you'll find poetry in the prophets too. In the books of First Kings, Second Kings, First and Second Samuel, there's very little poetry. It's all narrative. It's telling you what happened in this event, or what happened at this place, who did what. So it's more narrative. It's historical, and that's why those books are usually referred to in our English Bibles as Hebrew history. This is Hebrew wisdom. In the prophets, you'll find that a large section of each of the prophets was put in poetic form. And one gentleman, I forget his name, I read a book by him a few years ago. I can't call his name, but I kind of like what he had to say about it. He said that a prophet probably, at least in his mind's how it works out, and I kind of like the way he thought, the prophets probably noticing that their prophecies were given in poetic form, it's a good chance they sang their prophecy. It would be a chant maybe, or a song that they would sing. And when you read the book of Isaiah, you'll find some of its narrative, and then you'll find a section of poetry, large sections of poetry. And according to this guy, it's because they would sing those prophecies. I can't say that's true, but I like the idea of it. At any rate, 2/5 of the Old Testament is written in some form of poetic language. And a chief characteristic of Hebrew poetry is what we have here on the screen, Hebrew parallelism. We're studying the Psalms, to properly understand or exegete, take the message from the Psalm, we need to understand this kind of literature that is given to us, this poetic literature, particularly what we call here Hebrew parallelism. As it's defined here on the screen, Hebrew parallelism is a balanced thought pattern in which the thought of one line of poetry is compared with the thought of a succeeding line of poetry. We do it all the time in English. We just don't recognize it as parallelism. We don't think of it in that way. For example, you've heard the phrase, that's one small step for man, and what? How's the rest of it go? Anybody remember? Are you too young for this? This is back in the 1960s, late 60s.
It's like a giant step.
You're right. You're on the right track. This is one small step for man and one giant leap for mankind. Neil Armstrong, first astronaut who stepped on the moon, that's what he said. It's a form of parallelism. It is a balanced thought pattern in which the thought of one line, that's one small step for man, is compared with the thought of the second line, one giant leap for mankind. There's something that connects those two statements, and the thought is parallel. You know what parallel means? Two lines that are going along the same line. Well, that's what these two lines of text are doing. They're going along the same line, and we'll find different kinds of parallelism as we look at this tonight. But before we get into the biblical definitions and illustrations, I want to show you a few that makes you understand that we do it all the time. There's a proverb that says, he that will cheat at play will cheat you anyway. If he's going to cheat at cards, then he'll probably cheat at the real things in life too. But the point is, It's two lines that have two balanced thoughts that have some kind of connection. He that will cheat at play will cheat you anyway. Or how about this one? You know this one. Stupid is as what?
Stupid does.
Yeah, stupid is as stupid does. It's a parallelism. Well, you've heard that. People put it on their T-shirts or something like that. I noticed one the other day that it says, I think it's on a coffee cup, cousins by chance, friends by choice. It's a parallelism. It's two independent thoughts that are somehow connected. No pain, no gain. You've heard that one. Well, where did I go with this? In for a penny, in for a pound. You ever heard that? There's smoke, there's what?
Fire.
There's fire. Where there's smoke, there's fire. It's two independent. We've heard the proverbs. We know they exist. We just never thought of them as parallel or parallelisms, and that's what they are. When the tough gets going, when the going gets tough, what?
The tough get going.
Tough get going. It takes one to know one, somebody says. Don't marry someone you can live with. Marry someone you can't live without.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's how it goes. Don't marry someone you can live with. Marry someone you can't live without. Today, a reader. Tomorrow, what? Never heard that one? You guys are too young. I'm quoting old proverbs. Today, a reader. Tomorrow, a leader. If you read a lot,
Mm-hmm.
fill your mind with good things, then you're going to be a leader in the world, is the idea. Fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, what? Oh, come on. I'm not that old, guys.
Shame on me.
Shame on me. That's right. Fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. In there's a play called Pygmalion. You ever heard of it?
No.
No. George Bernard Shaw said, if you can't appreciate what you've got, you'd better get what you can appreciate. If you think about what he's saying there, if you can't appreciate what you've got, you better get what or something you can appreciate. It's another form of parallelism. And I'll just give you these examples in English to let you know that what's happening in the Hebrew language is not something new. We do it all the time, but it's very prominent, very dominant in the Hebrew wisdom literature. In the book, The Things They Carried, it's a book about Vietnam by Tim O'Brien. He says to generalize about war is like generalizing about peace. Almost everything is true. Almost nothing is true. That's pretty, if you break that down, that's pretty deep thought. But it's not our purpose tonight to discuss Tim O'Brien and his thoughts. Again, these are just different forms of parallelism that we use in the English language. English poets use it. We use it in our proverbs. We use it on our coffee cups, things of that nature. So it may sound like tonight, what I'm trying to teach you sounds like I'm trying to teach you Greek or Japanese. I'm not. You're familiar with these things, just not by these names.
Right.
But as we study the Psalms, we'll look at the names of what this is called. And it's called parallelism. And there are different kinds of parallelism, and that different kinds that are used in the scripture. And I want to notice at least some of the prominent kinds that you'll run across as you study the Psalms. One of those kinds is synonymous parallelism. What does the word synonymous mean?
It's kind of similar or the same.
Yeah, kind of similar or the same. A synonym, which comes from the word synonymous. A synonym is a group of words that kind of sound the same or are kind of the same. What's a synagogue? Have you ever heard of a synagogue? It's a gathering of people in the Jewish community, particularly. It's a gathering of people. A synonym is a gathering of words, or words that are similar. Synonymous parallelism, it's a gathering of it's a words that are two phrases that are alike. The first line makes a statement. The second line repeats that same statement synonymously
Okay.
using other words. It's the same statement. He's saying the same thing, but he's saying it in a different way. For example, in Psalm 19, it says, "The heavens declare the glory of God." We sing this song in one of our hymns, I think. "The heavens declare the glory of God, and the firmament shows his handiwork." You see it there, Jeffrey?
Okay.
Psalm 19, verse 1.
Verse 1 and 2.
Yeah, what does it say?
Okay, I'm in the New King James. The heavens are telling the glory of God, and the firmament proclaims his handiwork.
Okay, those two statements are the same. The heavens and the firmament are the same thing. It's just two different words or phrases that say the same thing. The glory of God and the handiwork of God, it's the same thing. So he repeats himself. We do that in songs as a matter of emphasis, or to make a song poetic. We make a statement and then we'll turn around and make that same statement again, just with different words. That's called synonymous parallelism. Turn to Psalm 24.
Psalm 24, 7. Okay.
Verse 1, what does it say?
The earth is the Lord's and all that is in it.
Go ahead.
For he has founded it on the seas and established it on the rivers.
Okay. I have, maybe you blanked out there and I didn't hear it. I have, the earth is the Lord's. You see how that word Lord is capitalized all the way through? That's what I was talking about a while ago. Not important, but it's there. The earth is the Lord's and all of its fullness, the world and those who dwell therein. Is that in your text?
Yes.
Okay. So the earth is the Lord's and all its fullness. The world, what in the second phrase, the world is the same thing as what?
The earth.
The earth. That's right. The world and all those who dwell therein would be the same thing as and all its fullness. So he's saying the same thing. He's just said it twice, but he's done it for a point of emphasis. He's done it as a means of making the song poetic in their language, maybe. So nothing new was added in the second line. He said the same thing as he did in the first line. He just said it in a different way. Look in Proverbs 9, verse 15. Proverbs 9, verse 15. Solomon is talking about the foolish woman, and he says she sits in her doorway, look at verse 15, to call those who pass by, who go straight on their way. It's the same thing. Those who pass by and those who go straight on their way are the same people. He's not calling two different sets of people, but he's making a point. He's talking to his son. He's talking about the foolish woman. He's doing it through poetic language. At least this recording of it is. And so he says, she sits in her doorway to call those who pass by, to call those who go straight on their way. And it's the same group of people. In Proverbs 22, verse 17, it says, incline your ear and hear the words of the wise, and apply your heart to my knowledge. Two phrases, same thing. Incline your ear to hear the words of the wise, apply to your heart my knowledge. Your ear and your heart are comparable. They're the same thing. My knowledge or the words of the wise are the same thing. So it's a form of poetry, help you memorize the poetry, to help you memorize the proverb, to make a point, various reasons why they might use it, but it's a form of poetry called synonymous parallelism. Another example is found in Psalm 83. Psalm 83. The singer cries out for the wrath of God to come upon the enemies of God to destroy them. And He says in verse 14, as the fire burns the woods, as the flame sets the mountains afire. It's two ways of saying the same thing, burn them up. There's one point that he's trying to make, but he's in the song, in the poetry, to help you memorize it or help you make it fit into the music that he's singing it by. He uses this parallelism. I don't know if I put this next one. No, I didn't. There's another form of parallelism that is actually, it is synonymous parallelism, but it's called chiastic. And let me spell that for you because I didn't put it in the notes. CHIASTIC. Chiastic parallelism. The word chiastic or chiastic comes from the Greek letter, the alphabet letter X. They call it chi or chi. And it's the idea behind it is a parallel statement is made in reverse order instead of in the same order. I'll give you an example. Turn to Psalm 51. Psalm 51. Don't get weighed down in these things. I want to illustrate them to you and help you see them so that when you come across them in Psalms, you'll understand what's going on. But don't get so weighed down in these things that you allow me to confuse you with these, okay? I just want to give you information tonight to help you when you read the Psalms and you see he said something or see how he said it. You say, oh, I recognize that. He's trying to make a point here by using whatever kind of parallelism. Psalm 51, listen to it. Have mercy on me, O God, according to your loving kindness. According to the multitude of your tender mercies, blot out my transgressions. There's 4 lines in the poem, in this particular part of the poem. And line 1, have mercy on me, O God, is matched up with line 4, blot out my transgressions. Lines 2 and 3 match when he says, according to your loving kindness and according to the multitude of your tender mercies. So it's this particular kind of synonymous parallelism, I can't say it tonight, is called chiastic parallelism because it's saying them 2 parallel statements in reverse order. If you read, we won't do it tonight because of time, but in Joel, the book of the prophet Joel, chapter 3, verses 17 through 21, he has a chiastic parallelism with 7 parts. And it's really an interesting study, but we won't do that tonight. Again, it's not important to remember so much the names of the kinds of parallelism. It's important in understanding when you read the Psalms, when you read the Proverbs, it's important that you know that a parallelism is being used. And it's done for a purpose. The song is going to come to life for you when you see that and when you know that. If you're reading a translation that has Psalms in a paragraph form rather than broken down line by line, you're going to miss this. You won't see it as much. And I don't know what your Bible has, and I'm not saying one is better than the other, but some Bibles, some publishers, rather than putting these poems line by line as they were written, they put it in a paragraph. They'll put all of Psalm 1 or all of Psalm 2 in a paragraph, or maybe 2 or 3 paragraphs. And they don't break it down line by line. But the songs were written line by line. And when you read them like that, when I put them in my text, when I'm writing a sermon or writing an article or something like that, I always break down the Psalms line by line because that's how they were written. And they're more understandable when we read them like that rather than as an entire paragraph. A second kind of parallelism is called antithetic. Again, don't get weighed down with these big words. These are not my words. These are words that, I'm told I have to teach you this as a part of the class. So I'm trying to do that and trying to make it as interesting as I can. Antithetic parallelism, it means just the opposite. The second line instead of adding to or saying the same thing as the first line, it contrasts the first line. The first line will say something, and the second line will say something different or something that contrasts that. Look at Psalm 20. Psalm 20. And I'll give you another piece of advice. When you read the Psalms, or when you tell somebody to turn to Psalm 20 or 25 or whatever, don't call them chapters. They're not chapters. When you open your hymn book and you turn to hymn number 368, you don't turn to chapter 368, do you? You turn to Psalm number 368. Well, that's what the Psalms are. It's Psalm number 20. It's not Psalm chapter 20, it's the 20th Psalm. But that's just a pet peeve of mine. Psalm 20 contrasts those who trust in horses and chariots with those who trust in God. And in the psalm, he sings down in verse 8, they have bowed down and fallen. And this is one of the ways, one of the hints that helps you know that it's an antithetical parallelism, the word but. You'll find it in most psalms that are antithetic. They have bowed down and fallen, but we have risen and stand upright. One's bowing down to idols, or in this case, to the power of horses and chariots, but we have risen and stood upright. We still follow or trust God. A couple more examples. Psalm 1, first Psalm. He says in verse 6, for the Lord knows the way of the righteous, but, there's our sign that it's antithetical, but the way of the ungodly shall perish. For the Lord knows the way of the righteous, but in contrast to that, the way of the ungodly shall perish. It tells you something about the word know. The Lord knows in the first part. If the ungodly will perish, but the Lord knows the way of the righteous, they're not going to perish. One of the best examples, and it's kind of long, but I think it's profitable to read it. Look with me at Proverbs chapter 10. Proverbs are chapters, whereas Psalms are not. Proverbs chapter 10. He says in verse 1, a wise son makes a glad father. Contrast, antithesis. But a foolish son is a grief to his mother, or of his mother. Verse 2, treasures of wickedness profit nothing, but righteousness delivers from death. See the contrast? The Lord will not allow the righteous soul to famish, but he cast away the desire of the wicked. He who has a slack hand, verse 4, becomes poor, but the hand of the diligent makes rich. Verse 6, blessings are on the head of the righteous, but violence covers the mouth of the wicked. The memory of the righteous is blessed, but the name of the wicked will rot. The wise heart, verse 8, the wise in heart will receive commands, but a prating fool will fail or fall. Verse 9, he who walks with integrity walks securely, but he who perverts his way will become known. Verse 10, he who winks with the eye will cause trouble, but a prating fool will fall. The mouth of the righteous is the well of life, but violence covers the mouth of the wicked. Hatred stirs up strife, but love covers all sins. Antithesis, or antithetical, or antithetic parallelism. And then there's synthetic parallelism. Synonymous parallelism, antithetic parallelism, synthetic. What would you think that is? It's talking about high-grade oil, right? Synthetic oil? What's he talking about? The second line, rather than contrasting or repeating the first line, it adds something to it. Synthetic. It's synthesis. It comes together. He adds something to it. For example, Psalm 2, he says in verse 6, yet I have set my king on my holy hill of Zion. So here's a song. In verse 1, or the first part of the line, he says, I have set my king. And the second line tells us something addition. This is not repeating. This is not in contrast. This is additional information. That's why it's called synthetic parallelism. Yet I set my king on my holy hill of Zion. Again, we do this in songs all the time. We just don't know what it's called. Didn't know there's a name for it. Now you have a name for it. Not important, but it helps you understand, helps you in your studies of the Psalm. Psalm 91. Psalm 91, concerning those who make the presence of God their habitation, the singer says, verse 10, no evil shall befall you, nor shall any plague come near your dwelling. But he's just adding to what he said in the first line. Job 23, Job says that God knows the way that I take. When he tested me, I shall come forth as gold. When he has tested me, I shall come forth as gold. Proverbs 13, better, I like this one, better is a dinner of herbs where love is than a fatted calf with hatred. I like that. You know, Jeffrey, you and I probably, if we were to sit down to go to somebody's house for dinner and all they gave us was salad, what do you think about that? No, I like salad. I like salad, but if that's all you're going to give me, I went to back when I was in the military years ago. I came across a guy in the military who knew my wife's family before I even knew my wife. He grew up with them. And he found out who I was, and I was married to Janine, who was the daughter of a family he knew way back when. So he invited us over for supper. And we went over, and I was young and outside of McDonald's hamburgers and pizzas and stuff like that, I didn't know what food existed. But we went over, and he served us crepes, spinach crepes. Now, I never heard of a crepe, and I never ate spinach. But that's what we had for supper that night. And I was, when I left, I was just as hungry as I was when I came. That's not how I eat. I like meat and potatoes, well, this proverb, better is a dinner of vegetables where love is than a fatted calf where hatred is. You go to a dinner where they serve everything you want, the fatted calf, for example, but there's envy, there's hatred, there's backstabbing going on. Which would you prefer, the fatted calf and all of that, or a dinner of spinach crepes with a good friend? That's the idea. But I digress. I'm supposed to be studying Psalms, not Proverbs. There are other kinds of parallelism. And I'll just mention some. I don't think I put them on here. Let me see. Yeah, there. Empathetic, which means it's just repetition. Psalm 18, Psalm 118. All nations surround me, but in the name of the Lord I will destroy them. They surround me. Yes, they surround me, but in the name of the Lord I will destroy them. Empathetic. Stare-like. It's repetition with advance. Psalm 77, I cried out unto the Lord with my voice, to God with my voice, and he gave ear to me. So he added something to it. It's step by step. Verse 11, he says, I will remember the works of the Lord. Surely I will remember your works of old, or your wonders of old. Verse 16, the waters saw you, O God. The waters saw you, and they were afraid. The depths also trembled. Stare-like. It just repeats, but then it advances. It repeats, and then it advances. It's a kind of psalm. Emblematic. Repetition with dressing, you might say. The second phrase is saying the same thing, but he's dressed it up a little bit. Psalm 37. Do not fret because of evildoers, nor be envious because of the workers of iniquity, for they soon shall be cut down like grass and wither as the green herb. Cut down like grass, wither as the green herb. He's just adding more color, you might say, to it. And introverted. Um, it advances, but it turns back. Let me give you an example. Psalm 80. You have brought out a vine out of Egypt. You have cast out the nations and planted it. You prepared room for it and caused it to take deep root, and it filled the land. The hills were covered with its shadow, and the mighty cedars with its boughs, or boughs. She sent out her boughs to the sea and her rivers, her branches to the rivers. And then responsory, you don't have to remember all these. I'm just giving you examples of them. Psalm 115, O Israel, trust in the Lord. This is responsory. It's where a statement is made and then a response is called for from the congregation. We do that in some songs that we sing. It says, O Israel, trust in the Lord. And the response is, He is their help and their shield. O house of Aaron, trust in the Lord. And the response is, He is their help and their shield. You who fear the Lord, trust in the Lord. And the response is, He is their help and their shield. You see how it goes? So there's that kind of parallelism. And we could, if we worked hard, we could figure out some more that are found in the Psalms, but I don't want to make it too heavy for you. I just want us to see that this, you'll find this when you enter the Psalms. Don't read the Psalms like a novel. It's not that. It's not a historical document. You're not going to get a narrative here. It's a psalm. And songs are poems, and poems have a special way of being read. If you just read a poem, English, Hebrew, Greek, whatever, it doesn't matter. If you just read a poem in a monotone voice, you're going to lose your audience. There's emphasis, there's flowing, there's rhythm in these songs, and the parallelism that's found there adds to or helps with that reading of the psalm. And because we're reading from one language into another, the Psalms have been translated from Hebrew into English, we're going to lose a lot of the emphasis. So the more we can add back to it with our knowledge that these things are there, the more we're going to be able to get from it. If you were to, take a song out of any language and translate it into another language, you're going to lose some features of it. So if we can make an effort to study these things, put some of those features back. We won't get everything, but we'll put some of those features back, and then we will get more from the Psalm. So yes, I understand these are technical terms and technical ideas, and I don't expect you to remember all of these. You might see some of them on a test, but I'm not going to sweat it a whole lot, because these are admittedly hard terms, sometimes even to pronounce, much less remember. I just want you to remember Psalms are written like this. These are in the Psalms, and it'll help you in your reading of the Psalms and application of the Psalms. There are other features of Hebrew poetry that, again, they're not discernible in English. They're there, but because you're reading it in English, but it was written in Hebrew, you're not going to see it. Do you know what alliteration is? When an author alliterates, it's where he takes preachers do it all the time. I don't like to do it, but some preachers really, really like it. They'll take, trying to think of an example. I heard a guy referred to the book of Philippians as Paul's pamphlet to the Philippians. PPP. Paul's pamphlet to the Philippians. That's alliteration. Some people make their sermons like that. They'll have every point start out with a P or a B or a C or whatever, and they'll go through the sermon like that. Well, the psalmist did that on occasion. There are times when, I don't know if I put these on here or not. Yeah, there they are. Alliteration. And the second one, I can't even hardly pronounce. Paronomasia. Pronounce it how you want to. It doesn't matter. It's a play on the sound of the meaning of words. In other words, the word sounds like this, and so he tries to make a play on that. There's a phrase, a word, I think it's automatopoeia in English. I think that's what it is. But the word splash, for example, where when you throw the water into a rock into the water, it makes a splash. The word splash and the sound of splash are very similar, and that's an automatopoeia. And this is similar to that. And then acrostic. You know what acrostic is? Acrostic. Psalm 19, 119. Turn in your Bible to Psalm 119.
Okay.
You see it divided into sections?
Yes.
At the first section, it says alpha. And the second section says beta. I think the third section says delta or delph. Do you see those words? Maybe your Bible doesn't have it.
Oh, mine doesn't have it.
Okay, but there are, the sections are divided, I think, into a series of 8 verses. And at the first set of 8 verses is called alpha. The second one's called beta. The third one's called data. I forget the Hebrew, but that's the Hebrew alphabet. And it goes through the Hebrew alphabet. And each line in the first section starts with an alpha. Each line in the second section begins with a beta. And each line in the third section begins with a D, and so forth. The gamma, I forget all the different labelings or letters that are there. I'm not a Hebrew scholar by any sense of the term, but each one of the stanzas or verses in that stanza begins with the letter that is at the top of that division, if you have that division labeled in your Bible. Apparently, your translation does not, but some of you do. As you become more familiar with the Psalms and Hebrew poetry in general, you'll see these things and you'll observe these things, and they will sometimes be remarkable. Sometimes they'll help in your understanding, but it's poetry. And if you were to take a class on English poetry, not Bible, but English poetry, you would see the same thing. We use in poetry these kinds of tools to help the poetry become more alive. If you're not poetically inclined, that's okay. If you're not musically inclined, that's okay. It just means that you may never recognize the tools that the prophet or the poet used. But there are tools here, poetic or linguistic tools that he uses, and it'll help you in studying the text and bringing the text to life. Main areas of focus. I have that in here. Yeah, main areas of focus in wisdom literature, and then we'll stop with literature and we'll focus on the Psalms. As we'll see when we look at the first Psalm, one of the main focuses to be found in wisdom literature is the contrast between the just or the righteous and the wicked. You'll see this not only in the Psalms, particularly in the Psalms, but you see it in the Proverbs, you see it in Ecclesiastes, you see it in Job, Song of Solomon, not so much, but it is a major focus in the wisdom literature. Another common theme is there are 2 ways. There's the way of life, there's the way of death, and that's presented. You might say that's one of the messages that's given to us in the wisdom literature. And as we've already mentioned, particularly in the Proverbs, there is a practical advice given, how to properly conduct yourself in this situation or that. That advice that we should be diligent in our efforts to do this or that. Advice that we should act responsibly or act with integrity. These are teachings that are found constantly in the wisdom literature, and in this sense, particularly in the book of Proverbs. And as we mentioned a while ago, the fear of the Lord. It's a common theme. It's a value system, or the foundation of a value system, that we'll find taught to us in wisdom literature, and especially in the book of Proverbs. All right. Have I bored you to tears yet?
Oh no, it's good stuff.
You're bored to tears. I understand it. It's hard stuff. It's not stuff that's exciting, like telling a story or something like that. And it's hard stuff, but it's necessary, and we'll profit from it in the end.
Yeah, it's really good because people like to make doctrines, out of a lot of the things that they find in the Psalms, right. By taking it too literal, in certain instances. So it's really good to be able to discern properly, what goes with what.
Thank you. And that's going to be an important point as we start looking at the Psalms, that sometimes people do go to the Psalms for their doctrine, and Psalms was not a doctrinal book. I'm not saying it doesn't teach any doctrine, but it's not a doctrinal book. That's not its purpose. There's another purpose for the book of Psalms, and doctrine is not it. Psalms is a book, or a group of books, or a group of songs that is deeply emotional. They're written in emotion and with emotion in emotional times, and they are God-centered. Yoder, in his book on study commentary on Psalms, makes this statement. He says the Psalms, and I like what he says. Pay attention. He says the Psalms are songs that come from the soul of worshipers. They are not the work of schoolmen or theologians. They are the songs, the emotions that come from the soul of worshipers. If you want a book that is written by a theologian, a school teaching book, so to speak, then go to Romans. Go to any one of the epistles of Paul, and they're great for that purpose, but that's not what the Psalms are. Psalms are not a theological treatise. And I hope I'm giving you a lot of technical information tonight, and a little bit more in later lessons, but I think most of the technical things are done. But I hope that I have not ruined your effort to study the Psalms by adding all this technical information. It's not a technical book. To understand some of the things that are going on in the Psalms, we need that background of what is a parallelism, or how do you write poetry? And that's what we've looked at tonight. But beyond that, it's not a theological treatise. It's not a technical book. It is an emotional book, or a book of emotional songs. God did not intend for us to get our doctrine from the book of Psalms. He did not intend that the Hebrews get their doctrine. This is not a doctrinal book. You want doctrine as a Hebrew? Go to Genesis, go to Exodus, go to Leviticus. There you'll get your doctrine. Okay, you'll get a You'll get history in 1st and 2nd Samuel and 1st and 2nd Kings. This is not a history book. It's not a doctrinal book. This is a book of songs. It's in a different class than the Torah. It's in a different class than the prophets. It's in a different class than the historical book. It's a book of devotions. It's a book of prayers, a book of praise addressed to the God of Israel. Interspersed in the songs are personal and national reminiscences intended to promote a spirit of worship. And that's what these songs are. When we study the Psalms, don't go there looking for a doctrine about this or a doctrine about that. You'll find some, but that's not their purpose. We'll find the doctrine of repentance, for example, in the Psalms. We'll find the doctrine of the resurrection mentioned in the Psalms, but that's not the purpose. The purpose here is to evoke a spirit of worship. That's why Psalms were written. Sometimes it's to evoke a an aid in bringing your heart back to God. A lot of times the psalmist, he has gone away from God. He acknowledges that in the song, but he comes back to God. So the intent, he starts out saying that he's angry with God. You didn't hear me. You left me here, or you did this to me. But by the end of the psalm, you'll find he's worshiping God, and that's what he wants to find us in our situation. Sometimes we're like that. We're angry at God. Something happened in our life, and our faith was shaken, or we're upset about this. But he says, don't let that take you away from God. Find the way that God has provided in that situation to bring you back to God. God is worthy of praise no matter what happens.
Amen.
When Peter wrote his book, First Peter, to the Christians who were suffering persecution, he starts out the very first line in his book. He says, God is worthy of praise. God is to be blessed, is how he put it. But the word blessed there is the word eulogetos. I know it's a big, long word, but you're familiar with the word eulogy?
Yes.
What is a eulogy?
That is, what we hear in funerals majority of the time.
What is it?
So it's the kind of like the final synopsis, I guess, of that person's life, I suppose.
That's right. And usually what are they doing? They're saying bad words about that person?
Oh, no, all the good stuff.
No, all the good stuff. That's what the word means. Eulogy is good words. That's what the word means. It's good words. We don't go to the funeral and hear how bad that guy was, and he was a drunk, or he was with this, or he was that. We do all that we can to find something good to say about that guy. Well, that's what a eulogy is, and that's where we get that word eulogy from the Greek word eulogotos, and it's the word translated in 1 Peter 1, saying, blessed be God. Eulogotos be God. Say good words about God, even if you're suffering trials, for his name's sake. Where did I get off on that? Oh yeah, the sometimes the songs are helping us to learn how to say good words about God, even though we've experienced this bad tragedy in our lives. They're songs, and
That's so true.
they're intended to promote a spirit of worship. When you open your Bible to the first Psalm, you'll see that it's labeled. The book is called Psalms in our English language, Psalms. That's actually a Greek word. In the Hebrew, there is no title. In fact, the Hebrew scholars argue about what should the title of the book of Psalms be. For us in English, we put Psalms, and it comes from a Greek word. It's the same Greek word found in Ephesians chapter 5 when we sing to one another in psalms, hymns, and spiritual songs. The word we translate as sing is the word psallo, and that's where we get the word psalm from. But it's not a Hebrew title. It's not a Hebrew word. The Hebrews some of them would put the word, and I can't pronounce it, I'll just spell it for you, Tehillim, Tehillim, and it means praise songs. That's the title that some of the Hebrews give to it, but even that's a matter of debate. The verb, this word telem, that's how I pronounce it. I don't know how it's pronounced, but that's how I pronounce it. It's noun form of this is found over 100 times in the book of Psalms, and so some of the Hebrew scholars put that as the name of the book in their Bibles. But we use the word Psalms, and where we get that from is the Greek word psallo, and it's the word translated sing in Ephesians chapter 5, verse 19. Well, there it is. Psalms were sung to historically to celebrate. Many of them were, not all of them, but many of the Psalms were sung to celebrate God's victory over his enemies, or the people of Israel's enemies. In fact, one of the first, not the first, but one of the first examples of song, major examples of song we find in the Bible is found where? Remember?
Was it Judges?
Before Judges.
Okay. Let's see. Oh, let me ask you, what about Lamech? Remember when he was saying about being avenged?
Being a what?
Remember Lamech?
Oh, yeah. About revenge. Okay.
Is that considered?
That would be a song.
Okay.
It's written in poetic language, whether it's a song or a proverb or what, I couldn't say. But yeah, that would have been a form of poetry from his time. That's right. Good catch. But one of the first songs we have recorded, it's not, again, the first. Some say that the book of Genesis chapter 1 was written in poetic language as a song, and it was done to help the Hebrews remember. If you think about it, now try to hear what I'm saying here. The book of Exodus is really our first Bible book. The book of Exodus is where Moses he's left Egypt, and he's set the Hebrew people down there in the wilderness. They're going to be there for 40 years, and he's teaching them. What is he teaching them? Well, he's teaching them what happened in the book of Genesis. Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy were all books written to the Hebrew people. But in the time of Genesis, there were no Hebrew people, right? And Adam and Eve weren't Hebrew. There were no Hebrews. Hebrews didn't come into existence until Genesis 20, I guess, when Isaac was born. I guess he's the first Hebrew. Abraham was a Gentile. And that's the argument that Paul makes in the book of Romans, and the Jews really didn't like it. But Abraham wasn't a Jew. He became a Jew, I suppose we could say. But Abraham was a Gentile, called out of Ur of the Chaldees. There were no Jews. God promised Abraham that from you will come this nation. So the nation of the Jews would come from Abraham. And that nation of Jews that came from Abraham is set down in the wilderness in the book of Exodus, and Moses is teaching them. So yes, Genesis is the first book of the Bible, but chronologically speaking, the story of Exodus, the written story of Exodus, is actually first. And he's in the book of Exodus, he will tell them the book of Genesis. I don't know why I said all of that, but I was getting to the point of Exodus chapter 15, where they came through the Red Sea, and Miriam, Moses' sister, led them in song. And we have a song there, and it's called the Song of Moses, actually, in Exodus chapter 15. And part of that song is used in the book of Psalms as well. We'll find Deborah and Jael and Barak defeated the Canaanite king of Jabin and his general. And then there was that song that you're talking about. Who was it that said Judges? Was that? So Judges chapter 5, we have that song that they sang in celebration of their victory. That's right. There are other books of poetry that we only have fragments of. They're not canonical. They're not part of the Bible, but they're mentioned. Some of them are mentioned in the Bible. The Book of Wars of Jehovah is mentioned in Numbers 21:14. We don't have that book. The Book of Jasher is mentioned in Joshua and also in 2 Samuel. This, I think, book was probably a compilation of some of the war songs. It was a time of war. And so the book of Jasher was probably some of the war songs they sang during the time of Joshua, maybe during the time of David. But we don't have record of those books. They just have mention of them. The development of the book of Psalms has a strong relationship to the temple. Again, I'm giving characteristics or some of the facts that we can ascertain about the Psalms. We'll get to the study of the Psalms. I promise we will. A little bit tonight, hopefully. But the development of the songbook itself is related to the building of the temple and the use of the temple. David could not build the temple, right? Remember that? David said, I won't build you a temple. God says, no, your hands are bloody. Your son will build me a temple. And so David gathered the materials for the temple. And probably some of the gathering of those materials was not just brick and mortar that he was gathering, but also the music program that David set up that would be used in the temple, and some of the songs that would be used. In the ancient Near East, there were guilds of singers. That was their job. Musicians. That was their job, and they were connected to the temple. They would come to the temple for the different feasts and celebrations and worship, and they were highly staffed and organized. And David is the one who established those guilds. You can read about it in First Chronicles chapter 6. Years later, Ezra and Nehemiah. This is probably about 500 years after David. Ezra and Nehemiah mentions these singers in use with the temple worship during their time, the temple music during their time. There's a Syrian document that noted that a Jewish king, we know him as Hezekiah, but a Jewish king sent singers to Sennacherib, King Sennacherib of the Syrians, in order to make Sennacherib happy. Sennacherib was going to attack the Jews or going to destroy the Jews, and King Hezekiah sent some of these trained singers to Sennacherib as a form of bribe or booty, you might say, to make him happy. And it did for a moment, but it didn't satisfy him completely. But they considered these singers that they had as a prize, so much so that he would send them to Sennacherib as a bribe. You'll find a lot of commentaries as you read different commentaries about the Psalms that they will try to say that, well, it came from this event in history, or it came from that event in history. And really, that may or may not be the case, that it came from this particular event in history, but that's not the purpose of the Psalm. The scholars, commentators, they all disagree about various Psalms, about how this Psalm came to be, what was the motivation behind this Psalm. But really, the Psalms are pretty silent about that. We want to say, well, David sang this when David went through that, whatever that is. But we really don't know that. It's just a speculation. And it might be a correct speculation that David was motivated to sing this song or write this poem because of what he went through on that particular experience. And I won't say that that's not what happened, but we can't say for sure that that is what happened, because the psalm itself doesn't say. Now, unless the psalm says that this was written because this happened, then we just don't know that. When you pick a psalm, any psalm, and turn to it in your Bible. Let's pick any one. Okay, just open it up, put your finger in there, and go to whatever psalm, the first part of whatever psalm. What does it say at the top of that psalm?
To the chief, I'm in Psalm 5. To the chief musician upon Nihilo, a psalm of David.
There you go. So that's a subscript, what's called a subscript. Those subscripts are not inspired. What do we mean by inspired?
Holy Spirit, God.
That's right. They did not come from God. They were additions from men. I'm not saying they're wrong. I'm just saying they are not from God. They're not part of the text. They were added to the text by later editors, and they may be correct. They may not be correct. Some scholars think that these subscripts were put in probably 400 or 500 years before Christ. So many of them, the subscripts, came to be 3 or 4 or 500 years after the song was written. So here I am, 500 BC, and David wrote a song in 1000 BC. And in 500 BC, I'm thinking, this is probably why David wrote that song, the purpose for which he wrote that song, and what's going to happen with that song. And I put that in as a subscript. Well, it may be true that that's exactly what happened. But then again, 500 years later, it's a good chance I'm going to not get that right every time, right? There's 150 Psalms. And to get it right every time, but I know exactly, unless God is telling me, put this in there, and I don't know that that's what's happening. I might have a good guess or good reason for saying this is why that psalm is written, and this is what's going to happen with that psalm. But those are additions. Some scholars take them very seriously. Some scholars take them very not seriously. And one of the interesting things that happened, or at least it's said to have happened by some of the commentators, is that the subscripts were, according to one or some authors, were actually put at the end of the psalm instead of at the front of the psalm. And the subscript that's in your Psalm 5 that you read is actually supposed to be at the bottom of Psalm 4. And so everything gets all mixed up because we're reading it as if it applies to Psalm 5, but the author who put the subscript in wrote it as if it was applying to Psalm 4. Me personally, and this is just me, I'm not saying what you should do, I don't pay them much mind. I don't even read the subscripts. When I put a text in, copy a text from my digital Bible and put it in my notes, I don't put the subscript in. I don't really care what it says. I don't care who the author was. God didn't have them signed by the author because that's not what's important. Did David write Psalm 1? Most likely. Did David write Psalm 23? Most likely. In fact, there are some Psalms quoted in the New Testament to which the author or the New Testament writer gives credit to David for writing that Psalm. So when Paul says in a text that David wrote such and such, I can go back and find that Psalm and I can say, well, I know that David wrote that Psalm. Not because David signed it, but because Paul, by inspiration, said David wrote that Psalm. So I can get some information like that. But from the Psalms themselves, we don't get that information, and there's a reason for that. That's not what's important here. What's important here is the worship of God. And so if you're smart enough to assign and knowledgeably assign this song to a particular author and to a particular event in that author's life, good for you. That's great. But that's not what David or God is wanting you to do with this song. God is wanting you to apply this song to your life. God is wanting you to be familiar with this particular song because it has an impact on what you're going through right now. And maybe the knowledge of what David was going through that caused him to write that song will help you in doing that. Maybe it won't. Maybe your situation is so totally different, but still the song is applicable to you. That's what God wants you to do. So in this study of Psalms, we're not going to pay a lot of attention to the subscripts. We're not going to pay a lot of attention to the historical data that's given to us by different commentators saying that this psalm was written by this person for this reason. Those things are interesting and helpful, maybe to a degree, but to me, they're not important. So we're not going to focus on that. Now, here's a point that y'all know who Lucy and, who was Lucy's husband? Lucy and, are y'all familiar with the old series, I Love Lucy?
Desi.
Ricky Ricardo?
What was her husband's name? He was,
Desi.
yeah. He would, what was his screen name? I forget his screen name.
Ricky Ricardo?
Ricky Ricardo, thank you. You said it. I just couldn't hear you. Ricky would tell Lucy, you got some splaining to do. Well, we might have some splaining to do here on this particular point. Many Psalms have gone through an editorial process. If somebody gives me a copy of the book of Romans that has gone through an editorial process, what do you imagine has happened there? Romans, 1 Corinthians, 2 Corinthians.
Been watered down,
Been watered down. Somebody's done some editing. And when we think of editing, we think of changing this for that reason, changing that for this reason or whatever. And that's what comes to my mind when somebody says this has been edited. I write an article each week for our church bulletin, and I am not the greatest linguist in the world, so I give it to my wife to edit it. They take out the bad English and put in the right pronouns and the right apostrophes and all that stuff. So she edits my book. She doesn't change the content of it, but she edits the bulletin to make it more presentable, more correct. Well, the editorial process that the Psalms went through was not for the purpose of, or for the normal purposes of editing. Now, I'll see if I can explain this for you. David, let's say David wrote a psalm. Let's call it Psalm 1, just for lack of better. We'll say Psalm 1. David wrote Psalm 1. David lived about 1000 BC, 1,000 years before Christ, probably 1,100 years before Christ. Anyway, 1,000 years before Christ. And he wrote this song. And it had particular meaning for him when he wrote this song. Let's suppose that 500 years later, Nehemiah has come back from Babylon. Now, let's don't go 500 years later. Let's go during the time of captivity, before Nehemiah came back. So let's say 300 or 400 years later. They're in captivity. The Jews are in Babylonian captivity, and they're singing songs. Ezekiel says they sang down by the river, not the song down by the river, but they were down by the river and they sang songs. And they would take these Psalms of David and they would apply them to their situation. And in doing so, they would sometimes change the words of the song to fit their situation. It went through an editorial process in the changing of that song. If God decided that he wanted that song, that the way the Jews sang it in captivity, that he wanted that song in the songbook, he would take the edited song and put it in the songbook. See what I'm saying? I'm not saying he did this with Psalm 1. I'm just using Psalm 1 as an illustration. The Psalm 1 was written by David for this situation, and it was good for that situation, but it was sung again over here 300 or 400 years later, but the words were changed a little bit, and they sang it for this situation. And if God encouraged that or inspired that, then that song is inspired just like the first one was, right? And then Nehemiah comes back, he rebuilds the walls, and Ezra, they rebuild the temple, they start temple worship again. And the songs that David wrote are still around, but they are not as applicable in the same way that when David wrote them. So some of those songs went through an editorial process and were changed. And that's why you find some songs that sound very, very much like other songs. And yet one's called a Song of David and one song called a Song of Hezekiah or someone else. It may be that it was the same song, but it was rewritten, edited, not stolen, so to speak, but inspiredly edited by Ezra or some other writer and put in the songbook in that way. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Am I confusing you?
No, it makes total sense. Because let's just say, like, if the first one was written during a time of mourning, and then the second one was reused. The first was reused maybe at a feast now of just remembrance, and we're happy, that we made it through.
Right.
I can understand that.
Well, that's right. Good applications. That's what happening sometimes. I don't say it happens all the time, but sometimes in the Psalms, they've gone through an editorial process, and the original author and his message have been lost to us, and we only have what the singers who have it recorded later on put in there. And I don't know if I can fully, or if I'm the best one to explain that to you, but I think you get the idea. There were 5 books of songs. You know, you and I have a hymn book, and it's got mine does anyway, over 1,000 songs in it. Well, they had a song book, you might say, but it was 5 different song books compiled into one book. It's called the Book of Psalms in our Bibles, but it's 5 different books, and they say that they correlate with the 5 books of the law: Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. But they have what they call 5 different books, and I think I have the divisions of that for you. Book 1 is Psalms 1 through 41. Book 2, Psalms 42 through 72, and you can see the rest there. That's how the Hebrews divided up the Psalms, and they had reasons for those divisions. We could go into that tonight, but I probably won't. There's not much purpose in that. The Hebrews probably had a great reason for that, but as it comes across to us in English, 2,000, 3,000 years later, some of those reasons for dividing up the books aren't as important. I'm trying to see where I want to. It is 7:49, so I've gone past the break time. Let's take a. Let's take a 10-minute break and come back at 8 o'clock.
Okay.
And we will try to wrap up this introduction to Psalms. And I'd hope to get into Psalm 1 tonight, but you guys talk too much. You see how I blame that on y'all?
Yeah, I'm gonna blame it on the rain.
All right, let's come back at 8 o'clock. Y'all get a glass of water or whatever. I will anyway.
Okay.
I'm just going to leave the recording going. All right, everybody back? There are different authors that are given to the Psalms as far as in the subscripts, and the New Testament doesn't go into that as far as naming the authors. They did tell us that David is the author of this psalm or that psalm. Sometimes it just says it is written. But anyway, in the subscripts, you'll find David is the author of 73 of the Psalms. Asaph is the author of 12. The descendants of Korah, which descendants of Korah were the ones who were in charge of the worship service. Korah was one of the Levites. That's right. He and his sons were given this particular function in the tabernacle and later on in the temple. So they were considered to be some of the authors of the Psalms. Solomon is considered to be the author of one or two. Moses is considered to be the author of Psalm 90. A fellow by the name of Herman the Ezrahite or Ezrahite is given the authorship of Psalm 88. And Ethan the Ezrahite, which may be Herman's brother, I don't know, was given Psalm 89. How accurate that is, I can't say. That will not be on a test, because to me, the authorship of the Psalms, the human authorship of the Psalm, and its historical context is not important. It's not the reason the Psalm was placed in the book. I believe that all the Psalms that we have in the book are inspired of God. They were put there for a reason. God inspired the editors to edit them as he did. God inspired the men who put these 5 books together, the five books of Psalms. I think he inspired that process. The Hebrews putting together the Old Testament as we have it today, I think that was done by inspiration. God not only inspired the words that are written in the book, God inspired, or providentially you might say, brought about the keeping of the book, the Bible, together. So this is not a book on or a study on that process, so we're not going to that any more than what we've done. I just believe these books are inspired of God. Do y'all have, I know you have your English text hard copy Bible in front of you. Do you have access to a digital Bible, a Google or anything like that where you can get different translations of the Bible?
Yeah.
Handy tonight?
Uh-huh.
Okay.
I can grab my phone as well. I won't mess up my screen. Yeah, I'll go on Bible Gateway.
Okay. You have the, Jeffrey, you have the New King James, right? Is that what you said?
I got the New King James hard copy. Right.
Okay. Turn in your New King James to Psalm 4.
Okay, going to
Psalm 4.
Psalm 4. All right.
Sister Pittman, can you turn in your computer Bible, whatever it is you have there, to the English Standard Version, ESV?
Yep.
And Sister Williams, are you still there? Okay. I will read from the translation called The Message. So I want to read Psalm 4. I'll have Jeffrey start us out by reading Psalm 4. It's 8 verses. Pay attention to what he says, and then I'll have Sister Pittman. All right, Sister Pittman. I keep calling you Sister Pittman. I want to go by your first name.
Oh, yeah, that's fine. You can call me O or Taria.
Ortaria. Thank you. Ortaria. I just got to remember how to say it. Ortaria. I just sound it out there. I can get it. Sister Ortaria. After he has done reading with the King James, New King James, I want you to read the same verses in the ESV. And everybody listen to what the comparison. Try to keep in your mind what the former translation said, and then as well as the translation that's being read. So start us off there, Jeffrey.
Okay, Psalm 4.
Psalm 4, yes.
Answer me when I call, O God of my right. You gave me room when I was in distress. Be gracious to me and hear my prayer. How long, you people, shall honor suffer shame? How long will you love vain words and seek after lies? But know that the Lord has set apart the faithful for himself. The Lord hears when I call to him. When you are disturbed, do not sin. Conquer and be silent. Offer right sacrifices and put your trust in the Lord. There are many who say, oh, that we might see some good. Let the light of your face shine on us, O Lord. You put gladness in my heart, more than when your grain and wine abound. I will both lie down and sleep in peace. For you alone, O Lord, make me lie down in safety.
All right. So let's turn now to the same psalm, but let's read it from the English Standard Version, ESV.
Okay. Answer me when I call, O God of my righteousness. You have given me relief when I was in distress. Be gracious to me and hear my prayer. O men, how long shall my honor be turned into shame? How long will you love vain words and seek after lies? But know that the Lord has set apart the godly for himself. The Lord hears when I call him. Be angry and do not sin. Ponder in your own hearts on your beds and be silent. Offer right sacrifices and put your trust in the Lord. There are many who say, who will show us some good? Lift up the light of your face upon us, O Lord. You have put more joy in my heart than they have when their grain and wine abound. In peace, I will both lie down and sleep, for you alone, O Lord, make me dwell in safety.
All right. You see the differences in those two translations?
Yep.
an added effect that I didn't actually anticipate, the way both of the Psalms were read. Sister O read it in a completely different way than Brother Jeffrey did. One's not right or wrong, it's just different. And that too adds something to the what you can gain from the Psalms, and it added to it when they were used 1,000 years ago, or actually 3,000 years ago, when David wrote a psalm, and then Hezekiah used that psalm later on in temple worship, and then Nehemiah used that song later on in temple worship, and the people who were in Babylon who did not come back to Jerusalem with Nehemiah, and they used that song, each of them using the song, whatever it was, in their own situation, and they would have read it differently, just as you two read it differently, and the message might have changed. And only, if someone, going back to what we were talking about a few minutes ago, if I decided that I don't like the way David wrote that song, or I don't like the words that David used in that song, and then I decided to edit it myself without any call from God to do so, now that's wrong. And that would not be inspired. But if God inspired Hezekiah, for example, and Hezekiah did use Psalms and did reuse some of David's Psalms, David, who was his ancestor before him, he used some of David's songs in a different way than David would have used them. In the time that experiences that David was fighting with Philistines, and Hezekiah was fighting with Syrians and Babylonians, and the situation was different. And the song called for by either David or Hezekiah was the appropriate song, but sometimes they went through an editorial process. And when we translate these same songs now 3,000 years later, trying to write Hebrew poetry in the English language, it becomes difficult for us to do like we would do in Greek with Paul writing Romans. We're pretty sure what Paul meant when he wrote Romans 1. And so while we're still taking it from one language into the other, these are factual statements. These are doctrinal statements, and they're clearly stated in the Greek language. But in Psalms, it's not a doctrinal treatise, and it can't be translated the same way. These are emotional songs, and so we need to bring them into our own lives, leave them inspired, being inspired of God, but bring them into our own lives and make the application there. A third translation of the same song is called The Message. I don't really call The Message a translation. It's more of a paraphrase, but sometimes it brings light to the song. Here's how he translated it. When I call, God gives me answers. God takes my side. Once in a tight place, you gave me room. Now I'm in trouble again. Grace me. Hear me. You rabble, how long will you how long do I put up with your scorn? How long will you lust after lies? How long will you live crazed by illusion? Look at this. Look. Who got picked by God? He listens the split second I call upon him. Complain if you must, but don't lash out. Keep your mouth shut and let your heart do the talking. Build your case before God and wait for his verdict. Why is everyone hungry for more? More, they say. More. I have God's more, and that's enough. More joy in one ordinary day than they get in all their shopping sprees at day's end. I'm ready for a sound sleep, for you, O God, have put my life back together. You see what he did? Like I said, this is more of a paraphrase, but he really brought it down to his life.
Yeah.
And while I may not agree with how he actually did that, because sometimes he does take a lot of liberties, I don't know with this particular psalm or not, but I think we need to look at these psalms and find a way to bring them into our lives. These are 3,000-year-old songs, and sometimes we have to work at it to bring them to our lives. And I don't think we need to change the text, but we need to find, if I'm having this difficulty, I need to go to the place in the Psalms that addresses that difficulty and sing that song in my heart. Make this song a part of my heart. Songs are not historical accounts. Those are easy to do. The songs are not doctrinal treatises. Those are easy to translate. You know exactly where the author is going and what he's going to say. Songs are different. I lived in Russia for several years as a missionary with my family. When we got there, there was no church. There were no Christians. We found some hymnals from old Russia they were called prayer books, and we couldn't read Russian. They had no notes with them. If you lived 300 years ago or 400 years ago in Russia, you might have learned these songs, and they were put to memory. Just like you can sing Amazing Grace, How Sweet the Sound. You know that song from backwards and forward. You know the music, and you don't need a book to. Well, that's how they learned these songs, and they just put them to memory, and then they wrote them down. 300 years later, if the music didn't go with it, well, you didn't have the music. You had to start from scratch with the music. Well, we didn't know the music. We didn't know the words, and the Russian words were so old, many of the Russians couldn't understand the words that were in the songs. So we had no songs to sing. So my wife and I took a hymn book, this particular hymn book actually, we took with us to Russia, and we sat down with a translator who was musically inclined. She was an artist, and she was more musically inclined than probably I am. But we sat down with her, and we would talk to her about, this is what the message of the song is. Now, I don't want you to take the words of the song and just take it word for word and put it into Russian, because it won't work. Russian rhymes and English rhymes. Most of our hymns in English, they rhyme. They're poems that rhyme. And you can't take that same rhyme and put it into Russian. They have to actually rewrite the song. And so that's what we did. We'd take a song out of the hymn book, and not trying to plagiarize, but take it and put the thought into the Russian language, so that we could have something to sing. The Christians there, the new Christians, could have something to sing there in the church in Russia. We ended up with close to 200 songs over the years that we were there that we translated. And if you were to go to Russia today and hear that song, you might recognize the tune. But then if we were to take the words of that song and take them back into the English language from the Russian, you might think, well, that's not the same song. Because it wasn't word for word. It was a thought process. We took the thought of the English song, made a poem in Russian language, and put it to the music. And I think probably some of that happened among the Psalms in the Bible. The Psalm that we have recorded may be the original words, or it may be the original words that went through a thought process by Hezekiah, and then they were put back into the text by God as the edited version rather than the original version. Now, I'm spending a lot of time on this because I want you to understand that some of these songs, while it's attributed to David, you look at what in David's life would have made him sing this. Well, it may be that David wrote the song, Hezekiah later edited it for his situation, and then Ezra later on found the song and thought, I need it for this situation, and we ended up with Ezra's rendition or Ezra's edits rather than David's original song. I can't say that's the process. No one can. But I think that is a process, or at least a likely process, through which some of these songs went. In a song book that I have, it's an older song book. You probably don't have it. We have a song that came from Psalm chapter 4, or Psalm chapter 4. Look at me say that. The fourth Psalm. And I wanted you to look at that. This is not a Psalm translation. This is Tillit S. Tedley's rendition or thought process that he got from Psalm 4. He didn't try to translate the Psalm. This is what it made him think of. Hear me when I call, O God, my righteousness. Unto thee I come in weakness and distress. Hold my trembling hand, lest helpless I should fall. Hear me, Lord, hear me. Hear me when I call. A beautiful song, actually. Hear me when I cry, O God. Attend unto my prayer. Y'all know this song? You ever heard it? It's beautiful.
No.
More and more I need thy mercy and thy care. Clouds of doubt arise and faith grows weak and small. Hear me, Lord, hear me. Oh, hear me when I call. Hear my voice, O God, and cleanse my soul within. Mercy do I need for all my doubts and sin. Only in thee or in thy grace I trust my all in all. Oh, hear me, Lord. Hear me. Oh, hear me when I call. Hear my prayer, O God. I need thy cleansing power. Let me feel thee near me each moment of each hour. Here, hold my trembling hand, lest helpless I should fall. Oh, hear me, Lord. Hear me. Oh, hear me when I call. It's a beautiful, beautiful song. And when we study the fourth Psalm together, we might sing that song together. All right. I just found that, and during the break, I put that in there so that we could look at that psalm or song together. Okay, I told you the authors that are attributed to the song. They have dates for those. I'm not going to go over those dates because I don't think it's important. Two key elements. Did I give all this? No, that's later on. Let me skip down to that. Key words found in the Psalms: righteousness or righteous. It's found 120 times. The word hear or obey is found 65 times. The word salvation found 80 times. The word praise, there's 4 different words for praise, and I didn't put down how many times it was used, but there were 93 times the word mercy is used. In Psalm 127, it's used in every verse. The word face of God, is used 36 times. The word eye, the eye of God, is used 54 times. So you can see the different emotions, the different poetic words that are used, and the intent of these songs. Major psalm categories and types. This will be the last section on our technical section of the Psalms before we get into the study of the Psalms. And I know you're tired of it, and I am too, but we have to go through it. And actually, this is a helpful thing. That there are 4, you can divide these into 4 major categories: the praise songs, the lament songs, the didactic songs, I'll explain that in a minute, and the royal or messianic songs. But they can actually be broken down even further, and that's what I will do. There are 8 different psalm categories. Didactic. It's the Greek word for teach, or we get this from the Greek word, which means to teach, and that's what the psalm does. It teaches you something. The psalm that discusses an issue that perplexes the human heart or the human mind. Praise songs, that's pretty obvious what those are. Songs of thanksgiving, those are pretty obvious what they are. Penitential psalms or songs of lament. Psalm 51 would be An example, Psalm 13, Psalm 38, where David, it seems, is lamenting his sin with Bathsheba, or his sin with Bathsheba's husband. There are Psalms of trust, which is obvious. There are Psalms that are called royal or messianic Psalms. These are Psalms which predict the coming of Messiah. Sometimes they're vague predictions. Sometimes they're very explicit predictions, and we'll see that in the second Psalm. We study it. And then there's imprecatory Psalm. That's a big long word for you. These are songs that evoke judgment on the enemies of God, or the enemies of the author, which he would have considered the enemies of God. And that seems to be a dominant theme in many of the Psalms. Any questions on what we have covered tonight?
You may have said this or not. I may have stepped away for a sec, but it has always been a question. Has there ever been an instance where we find musical notes?
From the Psalms?
Yes.
No, I don't know of any.
Okay.
They didn't, to my knowledge, they didn't write down. I'll speak in ignorance on that particular, whether did they have musical notes like we have 4-part harmony today, and you and I look in our psalm books and we see those notes. Some people know what they mean, some people don't. Did the ancients have a way of measuring the notes like we do? I've never actually studied that question, but to my knowledge, there's no recording or giving of notes to any of the songs so that we can know how it sounded when they sang it.
Okay.
Those songs, a lot of the Hebrew information that's passed down to us through the law and the prophets, particularly the law, they would sit around campfires at night, and the elder or the Levite or whatever was the particular wise man or teacher in that particular assembly or family gathering or whatever would tell stories. That's how they kept the stories alive. They would tell the story of David and Goliath. They would tell the story of Jonathan and the Philistines. They would tell the story of God and the creation. And oftentimes they would, in order to tell that story or remember that story, they would put it to song. And it would be sung by the one who was teaching. And maybe the children who were listening would learn that song. And that's how they learned. They didn't have a copy of the Bible to turn to like you and I do. They had a scroll that was the book of the law, that there was maybe one copy among 10,000s of people. So long narratives, as you and I know, would be hard to repeat to someone. You can tell a story. I mean, if I were to ask you to tell me the story, what's the one we tell at Christmas all the time about the rich guy who was a miser and he had 3 ghosts come to him?
Let's see. What was his name? I know
whatever it is, you know the story. And it's told in various languages and various ways. But each Christmas, we sit down. We don't. A lot of people do. We watch it on TV now, mostly. We tell that story every Christmas. Every occasion that celebrates that story celebrates, we talk about that story. Well, that's what they did with the Bible stories. Every year, around the time of what's called Purim, we call it Easter, they tell that story. And it's passed down. If every year you hear that story, you know that story. You may not be able to repeat it word for word, but you know that story. You can tell the story of Esther if you hear it every year. And on that day, that feast, Purim feast, they will tell that story. And by tradition, I don't know why I'm telling you this, but by tradition, when they tell that story, every time they read or say the name Haman, everybody stomps their feet and yells. It's kind of funny, but that's the way the Jews tell that story, and it has a memorizing effect. But some stories were told in dialogue like that, but some stories were told by song, and that's how they have kept those memories alive. But do we have the musical notes that go with that? Unfortunately, I'm like you. I'd like to hear how they sung those songs. Have you ever been overseas to Israel?
No.
Not, we flew by, but no, we didn't stop.
Yeah, if you were to stop and walk around in, say, Jerusalem, I think any town, but Jerusalem particularly, every third hour, somebody gets in that prayer tower and they sing. It's a prayer, they say, but it's basically sung. And you and I would not call that music. It's offensive to my ears to hear it because it sounds awful, but to them it's music. They have a different way of doing music than we do. And it's not bad, it's just different than what we're accustomed to hearing. It's more of a chant, and probably a lot of their songs are like that, and there's no, to our American or westernized ear, it's not musical, or at least not to us. It doesn't sound pleasant to us, but to them it does. It's pleasing, and it's soothing to them. So if we had their musical notes, I don't know that we would appreciate it much more than not having musical notes, because it would be so different than what we're accustomed to hearing. Our Western world thinks differently and sings differently than our Eastern world brothers or fellow humans. It's just, well, when we go to Russia, their songs. I can tell you if someone is singing a song, if it is a Russian song, even if it's sung in English, I can tell you that it's a Russian song because of the way it's sung.
They sound angry. Like Russians sound really angry.
Well, I can see how you would say that, and a lot of their songs are war songs, songs of victory, and songs of, well, they're war songs, and they do sound angry. But there's a composer, he's actually a member of the church, who is now, instead of doing what I did, I took American songs or English songs and made them into Russian songs by translating the idea into Russian language. Well, he is a composer, and he's Russian, and he is writing Russian songs, not from the English, and they are beautiful. Maybe during the course of this course, I'll show you one of those songs that's been translated into English, a Russian song that came to English, and it's just, to my ears, beautiful beyond measure. So they're not all like that, but you can typically tell when I go over there and I read a hymn book that someone's using today. I went to Ukraine a couple of years ago, and they have a hymn book that I wasn't familiar with, and I could see that some of the songs, and I could hear that some of the songs were English songs, but when they stepped up on or stumbled over into a Ukrainian or a Russian song, I knew immediately that that's where it came from, because they sing differently, and that their words, their music is different than ours. And I think, probably going back to your question, that would have come across if we had their musical notes that gave us what their song sounded like. I don't think it would be much help to it. I don't think we would like it from in our Western ear. Mm-hmm. If we lived over there in the Middle East somewhere, we might like it, because that's the music of our forefathers, and whatever music they have today, yes, it's going to be different, but it's still going to have traces of the their ancient way of singing, especially Middle East, because they hang on to tradition so much more than we do. Our traditions are shallow and not very well held here, but the Middle East, I mean, they've been doing it for thousands of years. We've been doing it for what, a couple hundred. Psalm 1. Here it is. We've got 30 minutes. It's called the door to the Psalms. because one needs to carefully go through this psalm in order to fully appreciate the psalms that come after it. I think it was divinely placed as Psalm 1. It didn't just, in our psalm books, I don't know how they have them in categories here, but in a particular category, they just put them in alphabetically or randomly in that particular category. This one says Savior Sacrifice is the category. Low in the grave he laid is 344, and Christ the Lord is risen today is 345. It could have been inverted without any harm being done to the song. It doesn't matter which one actually came first. Well, in this case, I think Psalm 1 came first for a reason, and God wanted it there for a reason, because if we understand, this is an introduction, you might say, to the theme of the Psalms. So if we get Psalm 1, we've got the general, generic theme of all the Psalms. It is, looking at our list on the PowerPoint of didactic, praise, thanksgiving, penitential, trust, messianic, or imprecatory, this is a didactic psalm, which means it's going to discuss issues which perplex the human mind. It's intended to teach a moral or a spiritual lesson. Now we need to remember, and we've talked about it for now 2 weeks, this is Jewish wisdom literature, and it's ancient. It's 2,000, 3,000 years old. It's not going to read or teach in the same way that we are normally taught. If you go to Harvard University or go to Georgia University or whatever, you're not going to get the same kind of teaching there that you get at the feet of this Jewish wisdom. In that ancient culture, teachers used pictures, not drawings, but word pictures that they would make in order to teach, an analogy. Jesus did this with his parables. They wanted their students to see the lesson, not just learn the facts. You and I, we go to a math class and we want to learn the facts. We go to a history class and we want to learn the facts. That's how we're taught. That's how we learn. In the Middle East, that's not how they teach. Maybe in a math class or a history class, that's probably how they do. But if you're wanting to learn the facts of life, if you're wanting to learn or teach a moral, spiritual lesson, they draw you a picture. Jesus did this over and over again, and that's what the psalmist is going to do. He's not going to teach us in the way that we're normally taught. He's going to draw us a picture. When we come to Psalm 1, it's the psalm that most of us are familiar with because it's the first psalm. And we read the Psalms like we read the book of Genesis. We read the first couple of chapters, 3 or 4 chapters, until we get to that list of names, and then we start, not so much. And then we do the same thing in Exodus. We'll read Exodus, first 3 or 4 or 5 chapters. We'll read the meat of the story and get the story, and then we get to those chapters which start talking about the law and explaining the law. We flip the page and go to Leviticus. We get to Leviticus and we don't like anything there, and then we get the Numbers, we get a few stories out of it. Then we go to Deuteronomy and we say, well, I've read that before, and we skip over to Joshua. We're looking for the meat. We're looking for the story. We're looking for new information. And so when we don't get it, or when we get bored with names, we skip. Well, we do the Psalms the same way. We read Psalm 1, we like it. We read Psalm 2, and we scratch our head a little bit, and then we read a few more and say, you know what, I'm tired of this, and we'll go to something else. But we know Psalm 1 because we usually at least get that one read, right? If I were to read to you Psalm 1 right now, you would be familiar with Psalm 1. You've heard this before. You've heard preachers preach sermons about this. You've read it yourself. And if I were to read to you Psalm 2, you would hear a few phrases in there that you remember. Yeah, I've heard that before, but it would not be as familiar to you. Over the years, we've read enough of the Psalms that we have our favorites. So we have Psalm 1, we have Psalm 23, we have Psalm 100, and we're familiar with those because they're our favorites, but all those ones in between, not so much. Well, Psalm 1 is one of the favorites because it's Psalm 1. It's the first one. It's we've read it many times because of where it's located at Psalm 1. And that may be why God put Psalm 1 as Psalm 1, because he knows he knows our tendencies, especially us lazy Americans, that if it's not entertaining, if it's not a sitcom, we're not interested, right? So he gets our attention first. He knows he's going to lose your attention in Psalm 2 and Psalm 3 and 4 and 150. So let me do what I can here in Psalm 1, because that's as long as I'm going to keep their attention. And so he gives us Psalm 1, but I think it's Psalm 1 for more than that. It's the first psalm because it has so much relationship to all the other psalms. It's the introductory psalm. To my mind, the reader of psalms, the singers, I wished I had, Sister Pittman, I wished I had notes to all the psalms so that I could sing them. I would really like to sing all the psalms, know how they were sung, but whether it's how they sung it back then or how we sing it now, I would love to sing them because that's what they are, they're songs. And that impresses me, and I love songs. I love singing. I'm not the world's greatest singer. I'm not the world's worst, I suppose, but I'm not the world's greatest singer. I know what notes do. I don't know what they're called. I can follow them in the book. But I love to sing. I love what songs say. I love what songs do to me, what they say to my heart. And we need to come to the Psalms with that attitude, with that purpose. I'm not here to be entertained by a story. If I want that, I can go to Daniel. If I want that, I can go to First and Second Kings and hear all the stories of the kings. I can go to Joshua and Judges and read about those stories. I'm here to worship. When I come to the book of Psalms, I'm here to worship. I'm here to soothe my soul. I'm here to learn how to express my pain or how to express my joy. That's why people have their favorite psalms, because it expresses what they feel more than any of the other songs do. God doesn't necessarily think that you will like all of the psalms, because some of them don't fit your personality, don't fit your situation. Some of them really, really fit your situation or really, really fit your personality. There are songs that you know in English, whether it's a spiritual song or otherwise, it's your favorite song. Why is it your favorite song? Because it expresses something about you or something to you that you really enjoy. That's what God was wanting to do, or is wanting to do in the Psalms or the Psalms. And he knows there's 150 of them. And of that 150, he knows that not all of them are going to resonate with you, but some of them will. Maybe one of them will. Psalm 23, everybody knows it, right? The Lord is my shepherd, I shall. We like that song. Even though we may not know everything that it's talking about, we like that song. It's familiar to us, and it's got some nice thoughts in it and words that we understand, thoughts that we understand. And it's not a bad thing that we don't like all of the Psalms. God understands that. He knows that some of them will apply. Psalm 1, like the other 149 songs, it's 1,000 years old, written in a different language, written in a theocratic culture. We don't understand theocratic culture except as a church. We are in a theocracy in the church. You know what a theocracy is? It's where you're ruled by God. Here in America, we are in we're not in a democracy, we're in a what's it called? Word slipped my mind. We'll just call it democracy, although that's not what we actually are. But we're accustomed to being ruled by our government, right? In a theocracy, you're ruled by God. God is your government. And in the church, that's what we are. Well, the Jews, they were a theocracy. They had a king, but that king was to read the law They didn't always, but it was their responsibility to read the law every year. Before he took the throne, he was to read the entire law. And every year, he was to read the entire law because it was the law of God. It would be in his mind. It would be how he ruled the people. The reason that the Jews ended up like they did is their kings didn't do what they were supposed to do. That's another story. But they were a theocracy. They were to be ruled by God. And for the most part, they were an agrarian society. It means they're farmers, shepherds. A lot of that is missed by us today. You ever been a shepherd? Any of you? You ever raised sheep? You ever touched a sheep? Most of us have, we can draw a picture of a sheep. We can make the sound of a sheep, but outside of a zoo or a visit to a farm, we've never seen one. Psalm 23 is going to have some difficulties for us if we don't know what shepherding is. And so some of the Psalms have to be explained on that basis. When we come to Psalm 1, we need to explain or understand some things about agriculture in order to understand it. And in the first Psalm, the agricultural metaphors that are used are simple, and so we can grasp them. And I think God put them there, or put Psalm 1 in its simple form as the first Psalm because he knows us. If he started out hard, started out deep, he's going to lose us real quick. So
Yes, he knows his sheep.
That's right, he knows his sheep. That's right. So he started out with a simple psalm, but simple as it is, as far as its wording, it's deep, and it conveys a message that's going to come through all of the psalms, or at least a majority. It is thematic to all of the psalms. So Psalm 1 is Psalm 1 because it needed to be Psalm 1. In this psalm, the Spirit, he's going to affirm to us that righteous existence is blessed by God. Wicked existence will not be. It's a temporary existence. It's going to end. And if you're wicked, on the other side of that end, it's not going to be comfortable for you. Righteous existence is blessed by God. Wicked existence is punished by God. That's the theme, and it's a theme carried through all the Psalms. Trying to not be a burden on your time. Tell me what you know about Memphis, Tennessee.
Let me see. Is that where the Ark exhibit is?
No, it is not.
Oh.
That's in Cincinnati, Ohio.
Oh.
That's really close.
Tennessee. Grand Ole Opry, is that there?
No, that's Nashville.
Nashville. Yeah. I know nothing.
Yeah. And I expected that you would know very little. You know that there is a Memphis, Tennessee.
Yeah.
And if you opened your map or your Googles, you'd find it's right there on the Mississippi River. Living in Atlanta, Georgia, you don't have much reason to know, or the metro Atlanta area, you don't have much reason to know much about Memphis, Tennessee. What do you know about Moscow, Russia?
Oh, even less.
Yeah, even less. This is one of the biggest cities in the world, and you know nothing about Moscow, Russia. What do you know about Tokyo, Japan?
Nope.
A bunch of Japanese people live there. I know that.
Yeah.
Actually, Tokyo is, by population, I think it's the most populated city in the world. It's the place where we just had the Olympics.
Oh, yeah.
So I just know that. I know that about it. But other than that, I don't know much about Tokyo.
Yeah.
What do you know about Jericho?
Woo, Joshua.
Yeah, oh, look at there.
Yeah. All right.
You know people who lived in Jericho. You know people who've been to Jericho. You know it had walls, and there's a song. What do you know about Bethlehem?
Jesus.
Yeah, Jesus was born there. What about Nazareth? What do you know about Nazareth?
And he's from there too. He's known as, that person from Nazareth.
Jesus of Nazareth. We know that Jesus. So you know things about these little bitty villages. Nazareth and Bethlehem. Jericho is more of a city now, and it was then. But Nazareth and Bethlehem, they were cowpen towns. Nazareth probably had a population of 300 people at the max.
Wow.
They're thousands of miles away. They had small populations. As far as the world is concerned, of all the history of the world and all the people in the world, Jericho and Nazareth and Bethlehem, they're little dots on the map. But you know something about those places. And you
Yes.
don't know about a town that is a major shipping industry and on the shipping on the Mississippi River. You don't know about Moscow, Russia, which has a huge impact on world history today and in yesteryear. You don't know about Tokyo, Japan, and it's one of the most populated cities in the world. But you know about Nazareth, you know about Bethlehem, you know about what can you tell me about the Jordan River?
Ooh, Naaman was told to dip
You,
in the
you
Jordan.
know people who've taken a bath in the Jordan River.
Yeah.
Now you think about that. You know so much about the River Jordan that you could tell me a man who took a bath in the Jordan River. What about the Sea of Galilee? What can you tell me about the Sea of Galilee?
Oh yeah, Sea of Galilee. That is also the one. Is that the one where Jesus Sea of Galilee? That I think that's what where he walked. Was that the one he walked?
That's the one he walked on. That's
Okay.
the one Jesus walked on. It's the one that Peter fished in.
Yep.
It's as far as seas go, it's not really a sea; it's a lake.
Yeah.
But it's pretty good sized lake. But as far as lakes go, I mean, we have Lake Michigan. You ever been to Lake Michigan?
Uh-uh.
But you know about Lake Michigan. There's the Great Lakes, the 5 Great Lakes up there. But the Sea of Galilee, you know people who have fished on it. You know people who have walked on it. You know people who have walked around it. The Dead Sea.
Oh yeah.
What do you know about the Dead Sea?
Think about the Dead Sea Scrolls.
There's the Dead Sea Scrolls. It's a desert. The Dead Sea is really in a desert, a hot, stinking desert. I mean, just hot, hot, hot. I've been there, and it's hot. And the Dead Sea is so filled with minerals.
That's why it's dark.
You can't,
Oh.
you cannot drown in the Dead Sea. You know that?
Oh yeah, yeah. I think they said because of the salt. Is it heavily salted as well?
It's the minerals in it, and it tastes like salt, but it's not. It is salt. It's a lot of other minerals, but you can float on the Dead Sea. Somebody has to push you under and hold you under for you to stay under. If you go out there, you'll almost walk on water. The Dead Sea.
Float around.
You don't have to swim. You'll just float. And when you get out, you're all nasty because all that stuff's all over you.
Yeah. Now ain't that something?
But you and I grew up, uh, uh, you know, we're just miles from the Mississippi River. We're just miles from Lake Lanier, but we don't know much about these places. We know about Canaan. We know about Israel. We know about Jerusalem. We know about Jericho. We know a lot about Palestine. Palestine is a word that was given to the land of Canaan. The Jews hate that word. But nevertheless, that's what it's called today. And in our minds, I'll just say this about me. In my mind, it's large, it's huge, because I know so much about it. I know people who lived there over thousands of years. I can name people who were there and the lives that they lived, the things that they did. I can't tell you who lived in Moscow. I can't tell you who lived in Memphis, Tennessee. I can't tell you who has been on the Mississippi River, but I can tell you things about this little bitty spot on the map. When you look at where Palestine is, the land of Canaan, it's a little bitty spot on the map. It's not big at all. It's not. You can drive across the whole land of Palestine, north to south, east and west, in less than a day. It doesn't take you long to go across the land. It's not big, but we know so much about it. It's large in our minds. We grew up going to church and Bible class, hearing about things that happened in this little spot of land on the other side of the world. We know about this. It's no bigger than the whole land. Is probably smaller than the state of Georgia. I'm not sure square mile for square mile if it's which one would actually be bigger or smaller, but it's not any bigger than Georgia. Maybe smaller. The whole land. Know so much about it. Things that have taken place there for over 2 or 3,000 years.
History. Ooh, thanks to God.
I went to New York City one time, and I'd heard all my life about New York City. I've seen it on television, the Macy's parade and all that stuff. And I've heard so much about it that when I went to New York, I expected to be wild. I mean, I really expected something big. I expected to be wide-eyed and dumbfounded by all that I seen. And granted, when I went there, I was only there for a week, a little over a week, and I didn't get to do or see everything that was there, nor did I want to. But don't tell anybody that's from New York. They get easily offended. I was way under impressed, even let down when I went to New York. I saw it because of the places I went, and I know I didn't go to all the places, but the places I went, it was just a tourist trap, a big tourist trap.
Yeah.
You find in Sevierville, Tennessee, just a bigger trap. I wasn't impressed.
Yeah.
I wanted to be impressed, but I wasn't impressed. But I go to the land of Canaan, and I'm there for 2 weeks, and I just couldn't get enough.
Yes.
I couldn't get enough information about it. I wanted to stay longer and do more, but it's just a little hot, arid place. But I know so much about it. It's huge in my mind.
Wow.
And it is in yours.
Yes, exactly. Oh, I tell you.
The sea of the area. I got a couple minutes. We won't get into Psalm 1 tonight, but I'm telling you all of this as background to Psalm 1 that we'll get into next week. The place we call Palestine, or the land of Canaan, it's a land of contrast. Even though it's a small area as far as topography goes, the changes that take place in that little spot of land, that little territory of land, are significant. If you travel from the Sea of Galilee north and west, you'll toward the Mediterranean Sea and Lebanon, you'll find the climate will change drastically in just that few miles.
Wow.
You'll find that the land changes drastically in just that few miles. Where in Galilee, everything is fertile and green and beautiful. When you start traveling west and out of Galilee, it becomes very dry. Even though you got the Mediterranean Sea, that's all salt water. You can't drink it. It becomes very dry. Green things you'll find tropical atmosphere around the Mediterranean Sea, but outside of the coastal tropics, green things are hard to find. You get down to Jericho, it's desert. You got palm trees down there, and palm trees and date trees seem to thrive, but outside of that, it's just brown rocks. Rocks, and it's they get moisture, I guess, from the Mediterranean Sea, the clouds that come from the Mediterranean Sea. But outside of that, it's just dry, rugged hills that erode quickly because of no vegetation growing on them. It's not necessarily because they have bad soil; it's just because there's a lack of moisture. You look at a map and see that Canaan is there on the Mediterranean, and it's not far from the equator. Being close to the equator, you recognize it's going to be hot. It's going to be hot. It's going to be usually humid, but because of the topography in the land of Canaan, that humidity goes away or is gone quickly, and it's very hot and dry. There is a thing they have in Palestine, in southern Palestine. It's called a wadi. It's basically a creek bed that's dry most of the year, but there's a rainy season. So it may be, the rain comes off of those mountains and it goes into that desert, And it
Yes.
comes quickly because the rain doesn't absorb into the rock of those mountains. And so it just washes down off those mountains, and then it comes into these little dry creek beds or wadis, and they flood. And that water moves quickly, real quickly, destructively quickly, in those wadis, but it's only for a short time. It only happens when it rains, and it doesn't rain very often. And the rain is usually miles and miles away up in the mountains. Then it comes off the mountains and down into the desert via those wadis. So that's something that you'll see there, and it's something that has a relationship to what we're going to read about in
Yeah.
Psalm 1. Water was a scarce
Yeah.
quantity.
Yep.
If you had a water hole, if you had a source of flowing water, it was like gold.
Mm-hmm.
And people valued that. It was worth more than money. And that's going to be important. That thought or that knowledge is going to be important when we look at Psalm 1 and try to understand some of the things that he's saying there. All right, it's 9 o'clock. I didn't get to the Psalm, but we are going to start off with Psalm 1 next week. But I want to take the little bit of time we had tonight to give you that background to the Psalm so that we can, when we get into it, we'll understand some of the metaphors that he's going to use. He's going to draw us a picture. And I'm trying to help him draw that picture by giving you some of this knowledge ahead of time. He's going to use words and metaphors to draw us a picture. And if you're not familiar with the picture, then you're going to miss the message. So next week, we'll look at Psalm 1. We'll look at the picture that he's going to draw for us. And hopefully the little bit of information I gave you tonight will help you in drawing that picture in your mind.
It was wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your attention. Thank you for not going to sleep on me. I know some of the lesson tonight or some of the things that I gave out tonight is dry and boring, not exciting, but it's things that will help us if we can just grasp portions of it. It'll help us as we look at the Psalms and try to get their meaning.
Yep, very enriching. Very enriching. Yep,
Thank you very much. And thank you.
Love y'all. Have a good night.
Look forward to seeing you next week.
Okay.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.